Welcome, Gunrunner.
In recent Amazing Exclusives videos, I've covered a lot of pretty obscure systems, like the Sam Coupe, Bally Astrocade and Sega SG-1000. But I thought it was time to look at something a bit more mainstream, that is rather conspicuous by its absence in this series so far. The 16-bit Super Nintendo, or Super Famicom for those of you in Japan. Firstly, I have to confess that my knowledge and experience of this iconic console is a lot more limited than most others of its era, probably because I never grew up with it, and no longer own one in the present day, having sold mine off some years ago when I was slimming down my collection before I got married. It might surprise many of you to learn that I only actually knew one person who had one growing up, my next door neighbour. He was the only person I knew with an NES previously, but even then he traded it in for a Mega Drive when Streets of Rage 2 came out, because he fell so deeply in love with the game. Although I should add that my younger brother has a pretty substantial SNES collection in the present day, so I have played on that a fair bit. And that lack of massive SNES exposure very much influenced the way I approached this list, because when I looked up a list of Super Nintendo exclusives, I was bamboozled by just how many there were. It would be interesting to see which console has the most exclusive games actually, because my money would go on Nintendo's 16-bitter for the honour. Not knowing where to start, I decided to look down the list and see what I recognised, and before long I had a list of games that I was actually very familiar with. So that's what we have here. All 10 games on this particular list are personal favourites of mine, rather than being the very best exclusives the console might or might not have to offer. With this in mind, I have to warn you that you won't find any of the SNES's much vaunted RPGs here, because that just isn't a genre I remotely enjoy. I very much stuck to what I know and love. But that said, I still think I've compiled a very good list here, and I tried to make sure that the list was also as diverse as possible, with games covering a wide range of different types and styles. So I'm sure plenty of you will be shouting at me in the comments with cries of games that I should have included, and I very much encourage you to do so. It's what these videos are all about after all, a journey of discovery for both you and me. Now with all that out of the way, I think it's time to focus on those games, as I proudly present 10 amazing Super Nintendo exclusives.
Words can't describe the endless challenge of Super Mario World, so we let the players do the talking. Super Mario World is here. It's one of the new generation of Nintendo games. It comes only with Super Nintendo, and it's like nothing you've ever faced. Now you're playing with power. Superpower.
A highly original and exclusive game, the aim of ActRaiser is to play the role of a divine god and let civilization flourish. You do this by listening to people's wishes, issuing directives, performing miracles, and getting rid of all sorts of creatures. Very much a game of two genres in one. In simulation mode you fly around the land, expanding the reach of civilization, playing a bit like an action-orientated version of SimCity, whilst in action mode you traverse platform-based levels in traditional 2D hack-and-slash style fashion, disposing of enemies and defeating bosses. There is an option to play just the action scenes, but this really isn't recommended, as played on their own and out of context, they really only amount to standard 2D scrolling fighting levels. The game really needs to be experienced in full, as the two different sections affect each other directly. Although each part of the game isn't really anything special on its own, ActRaiser really is a case of something being more than the sum of its parts. There is so much to do here with good sized challenge to back it up, and talking of backup, it's also possible to save all your progress thanks to a very handy battery backup inside the cart. All aspects of this game are well above average, the graphics are simple yet clear and effective, and the audio provides plenty of atmosphere in the right areas. It's also well worth checking out the more than worthy sequel too. Developed by the legendary Pickford brothers, who are perhaps best remembered by many of us for creating a multitude of amazing 8-bit budget games for home computers like 180, Zub, Arma and Feud, with a soundtrack by the even more legendary Tim Follin, Block is a hugely underrated platform game for the SNES that is too often ignored in favour of Mario's many outings and spin-offs. Although much of the formula here is pretty standard, it does have some pretty unique and rather quirky features. For example, the main character Plock is able to throw his limbs at enemies and retrieve them from coat hangers on certain levels too. There are also different types of levels to bounce through. Straight out, get to the end linear ones, and also bug hunts in which you have to find a set of enemies to dispose of before going to the exit. Throw in a pile of boss fights, some wonderful storytelling involving Plock's grandpa, and the power-up system that revolves around wearing different costumes, and you have a game that's bursting with charm. It's actually quite remarkable that Plock was never followed up by a sequel, as it seems to set everything up for it. As mentioned, the music is wonderful, the ridiculously colourful graphics likewise, and the controls are spot on. Okay, it's a pretty challenging game at times, but not in an unfair way, and it certainly won't put you off. Also known as Return of Double Dragon in Japan, Super Double Dragon is the fourth game in the famous beat-em-up franchise, and rather remarkably, a SNES exclusive too. It's also one of my favourite games for this console, and one of the titles I've played the most on my brilliant little Evercade handheld, thanks to its inclusion on the Technos Collection 1 cartridge. This game very much follows on from the 3 arcade games that came before it, with Billy and Jimmy Lee continuing their fight against the evil Shadow Warriors gang. As before, you beat up bad guys, defeat bosses and collect weapons to aid you in your battles. But developers Technos have added a few new features too. Perhaps the most notable of these is the ability to block, something clearly borrowed from the many one-on-one fighters of the time. This feature also introduces new counter moves that can only be performed after blocking an attack, and there is also a new power bar which is used for performing your specials. Another interesting thing about Super Double Dragon is the way they further enhance the differences between the two Lee brothers, not just in the way they look, but also the more individualistic movesets. The graphics are pretty standard stuff for the series, as is the excellent soundtrack, and the 2-player simultaneous gameplay will definitely keep you hooked. For those of you who aren't in the know, Exhaust Heat is a Formula 1 styled racing game for the Super Nintendo, released in 1992 by Seta, and one of the most interesting games of its type on a 16-bit machine. Like many other popular SNES racers out there like Super Mario Kart and F-Zero, it utilises the impressive Mode 7 to display the visuals, but goes one up on those aforementioned titles by adding a rather unique raised viewpoint, which is very much the game's defining feature. In the game itself, you play through the full F1 season racing around real circuits from around the world, as you try to become the driver's champion. Aside from the unique viewpoint, the other great feature of Exhaust Heat is the upgrade system. Your car starts off with a stock setup and is rather slow with it, but a variety of bolt-ons can be acquired to help you win more races. You You can upgrade your tyres, engine, gearbox, suspension and much more. One thing that really struck me about the game once I started playing was how open it feels, much less claustrophobic than other F1 games where the cars are often side by side. Okay, this makes it a lot less realistic as type passing is very much a key feature of the sport, but for me it makes a much better racing experience, more in the arcade style than a simulation one. The SNES has some really great racing games out there, but this is one of the more underrated ones. The third game in Taito's hugely popular Arcanoid series, which took Atari's Breakout and evolved it for a new generation. The most surprising thing about this one is its incredibly late 1997 release, meaning not many people got to try it back in the day, which is a real pity. Okay, this isn't an earth-shattering experience, it's just more of the same really, but it's still a solid version of the famous Bat and Ball Brick Breaker, and even better, it also supports the SNES mouse controller, which gives you far better control than the joypad. Although the sensitivity options do help you tweak this play method a bit. Though it again has all the usual Arcanoid play features we know and love, such as power-up capsules, little enemies that bounce around the levels, and boss fights every 10 or so levels. It also has some nice multiplayer options too, which add interest, including the standard alternating turns as you complete for the high score, simultaneous play, or the really unique split-screen battle mode, which is worth the entry price alone here. There are also passwords to save your progress and a brilliant level editor, but you'd think they would have included battery backup to save your created levels. It's a real shame this feature was omitted. The graphics and sound are both nice, if unspectacular, but such features have never been the main attraction of Arcanoid. It's all about the addictive gameplay. If you ask somebody what the best shoot 'em up on the Super Nintendo is, then chances are they're going to reply Axelay. Konami's game has not only built up a reputation as one of the system's best shooters, it's also been famed over the years for its amazing graphical effects too, and remains a SNES exclusive. Supposedly the game started off as a spin-off of the hugely popular Gradius series, but soon evolved into much more than that. However, there are still some clear influences there, especially from the second game Salamander, aka Life Force, such as the way it combines both horizontal and vertical scrolling stages. The gameplay in Axelay varies quite a bit from similar shooters, and that instead of the player collecting weapon power-ups dropped by enemies, you actually earn more advanced weapons as you progress through the game. There are 3 weapon types in total: standard laser, special weapon and bomb. You can freely switch between each of these weapons as you play. At the end of each level, a new more powerful variation of one of these types of weapons is added to your arsenal. You can then modify your fighter to suit the needs of the next level. I did already mention that the graphics in Axelay are stunning, but I should also add that the music and sound effects are top notch too. I don't think I need to tell you that this title remains a genuine SNES essential. If you owned an Atari ST or Amiga back in the day, or indeed a Sega Mega Drive for that matter, then you'll be well aware of the amazing Lotus Turbo Challenge series from Gremlin. For some reason, none of that famous trilogy ever appeared on the SNES, but it did actually get a trilogy of its own from the same group of people that follows a very similar concept. These were called Top Gear, missing the license of the famous British sports car manufacturer, but looking, playing and sounding very much the same in most regards. There's one pretty key difference in the Top Gear trilogy, however: the addition of rival drivers. Although you are racing against a field of 19 other cars, one of these is designated as your constant rival due to the split screen mode of the game, which was very much taken from the first Lotus title. But in Lotus, the second window is inactive in single player mode, whereas in this game it isn't, being in full use all the time, regardless of whether you're playing against another player or racing the CPU drivers. This rivals feature actually makes the action seem a lot more intense, as you always have somebody to beat regardless of your overall ranking. There are 32 tracks across 8 areas, 4 different cars, a handy password feature and difficulty levels too. Top Gear looks fantastic, has an amazing soundtrack from Barry Leach and plays like a dream too. If you asked me what the most unique and original game on the Super Nintendo was, I'd point my finger at the Fireman by Human Entertainment. The plot tells us that a large fire has broken out in the middle of a Christmas party held by chemical company Microtech. Crack firemen Pete and Daniel, as well as some of their colleagues, have been sent to the building to try and save the people trapped there, whilst fighting back the flames. They've also been alerted to some explosive chemicals that are stored in the basement, which have to be removed if they're going to save the day. The player controls the first of those firemen, Pete Gray, but your computer control partner, Daniel McLean, provides backup all the way. You will also run into all your colleagues as you make your way around the building, and communicating with them becomes a key part of the game. You put out the fires using your unlimited water hose and limited fire extinguishing bombs. Pete takes damage from fire and extreme heat, and when the life gauge reaches 0, it's game over. However, you can restore some of this by saving trapped civilians. Each level has a boss fire that can only be extinguished in a specific way, which is very clever indeed. The Fireman has some really nice graphical effects, great tunes and really compulsive gameplay that keeps you coming back for more. I think everyone out there is well aware of the awesome PC Engine pinball games Alien Crush and Devil's Crush, the latter of which was also ported to the Sega Mega Drive as Dragon's Fury. But people don't seem to be so aware of the Super Nintendo only third entry, Jackie Crush. The more well known Mega Drive only sequel, Dragon's Revenge, is actually the fourth game in the franchise. Once again, we see the amazing compile on Coding Duties, best known for their amazing shoot 'em up games as well as the Puyo Puyo series, with Naxat Soft as the publisher. Not much has changed when it comes to the gameplay either, as this is still a fantasy style video pinball game, bringing in a multitude of elements that simply aren't possible on a real pinball table. You might be wondering where the name comes from. Perhaps you thought that Sly Stallone's mum was on the loose again, but I can actually tell you that Jackie is a type of Japanese demon taken from ancient mythology. So the game takes place in hell on a single table divided into 3 different sectors with 2 flippers on each. You can also access one of 6 bonus screens by shooting the ball into various warp zones that open up periodically. I don't think Jackie Crush is quite as good as the Incredible Devil Crush, but it's still my favourite Super Nintendo pinball game and a must-have title for everyone who owns one. We've already had one scrolling beat 'em up on this list, but I couldn't help but add another one, because as many of you will no doubt know, it's by far my favourite genre. The first Final Fight on the Super Nintendo was somewhat disappointing for me. It was single player only, censored, and lacked enemies on screen. The Stairs Only Final Fight 2 arrived nearly 3 years later in 1993, and fixed most of these issues, but was still far from perfect, being widely criticised for its limited attacks and lack of variation. So Capcom went back to the drawing board once again and released the final SNES instalment in Final Fight 3 in 1995. And finally got everything right. 2-player simultaneous gameplay, check. More enemies on screen, check. Varied attacks, check. And gameplay variation, check. They even added a rather clever new mode where you can have a CPU controlled second player. Those old favourites, Metro City Mayor Mike Hagar and his daughter's boyfriend Guy, are back for more, but Cody, who I never liked anyway, has been replaced by 2 new characters in Dean and female fighter Lucia, who are both high-ranking cops serving under the mayor. It's a close contest for the best SNES beat-em-up, but with its big bold graphics, booming sound and non-stop action, I'd say that Final Fight 3 just about takes the crown, and that's why I've chosen to end on it here.
There's Dad over there.
Ooh, I just love all the new things Kmart has here.
Oh, I can see that.
So that's the new Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
What about it?
They say it has 16-bit technology, whatever that means.
Oh, I see. What else do they say?
That it has 3D graphics and digital stereo sound, and that Super Mario World is included.
Okay, we'll get it for him. So, how long did he work on you?
About 2 weeks.
And that rounds up my look at 10 amazing Super Nintendo exclusives. Can you think of any other one-off titles that only ever came out for this iconic 16-bit console, or do you think some of these games were unworthy of inclusion? I always love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comments section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons who continue to support my channel and make videos like this possible. I must give special thanks to the following patrons and YouTube backers in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Grady Haynes, Mitchell Valentino, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Dos Gamerman, Sonic Mania 999, Paul Daniel, Andrew McKay, Retro Resolution, Matt Standish, James Taylor, Trogdor the Burninator, Mins, A Bit Guy, Luke MC, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitsune, Daniel Skoronsky, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, I'll see you all again for another video very soon.